It was an ordinary day in the heart of the city, with people rushing about their daily lives, unaware of the unexpected encounter that was about to unfold. An elderly homeless man, weathered by time and life on the streets, shuffled through the alleyways, seeking shelter from the cold. But that day, as he wandered through the shadows, he stumbled upon something he never could have anticipated. 3 young children, their dark skin shining in the dim light, huddled together in a corner, alone and vulnerable. What happened next would leave everyone who witnessed it in a state of utter disbelief. For it was a moment that would change their lives forever. The elderly man, his face creased with years of hardship, stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. His instincts screamed to help, but he was just as vulnerable as the children before him. He shuffled closer, squinting his tired eyes to make sense of the scene. The children looked at him with a mix of fear and hope, as if they had seen too much of the world's cruelty to trust anyone easily. But there was something in their eyes, something that told him they were in desperate need of help. "Where are your parents?" he asked, his voice raspy but gentle. The eldest of the 3, a girl no older than 8, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand before speaking in a soft voice. "We don't have parents anymore. They left us." The old man's heart sank. He knew the pain of abandonment, the kind that left scars deep inside, and he felt it now in the pit of his stomach. He looked around, seeing the cold concrete streets stretch out endlessly before him. No one else seemed to notice the children. It was just him and them. In this moment of hopelessness, "Come with me," he said, surprising even himself with the words. "I may not have much, but I can give you shelter. I can give you warmth." The 3 children exchanged uncertain glances, and for a brief moment, the street seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a hesitant nod from the girl, they followed him. As they walked through the alleys, the old man couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility that he hadn't felt in years. The children's presence sparked something in him, perhaps a glimmer of purpose he thought he had lost. But what neither the man nor the children knew was that this simple act of kindness would soon unravel a series of events that would shake their world to its core. That night, after the man managed to find a small, abandoned building where they could rest, something strange happened. The girl, who had been quiet all evening, suddenly spoke again, her voice trembling. "There's something you need to know about us," she whispered. "We're not just ordinary children. We're different." The old man turned to her, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Different how?" Her eyes darted around nervously, and she leaned in closer. "We have powers, and the people who took us, they want us back. They'll stop at nothing to get us." The old man's heart raced. Powers? He had lived a lifetime in the harshest corners of the world. Yet nothing had prepared him for this. The flickering candlelight cast shadows on the walls as the children huddled together, their eyes wide with fear. The girl's words hung in the air, heavy and unsettling. "Who wants you?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. The girl hesitated before answering, glancing around nervously as though expecting someone to appear at any moment. "We don't know their names, but they've been following us for weeks. They're dangerous. They want to use us for something terrible." The man's mind raced. He had seen people chase after children for all kinds of reasons: money, power, revenge, but this felt different. The urgency in the girl's voice, the fear that seemed to radiate from all of them. It was more than just a case of neglect or cruelty. There was something more at play here. "How do you know about these powers?" he asked, his tone softening as he looked at the children. The youngest of the 3, a boy no older than 5, looked up at him with wide, innocent eyes. "I can make things float," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "And I can hear things that no one else can hear." The man's breath caught in his throat. He had always known there was something extraordinary about the children, the way they moved, the way they seemed to be connected to the world around them in a way he couldn't understand. But this was something beyond his comprehension. The girl continued, her voice steady but filled with a sense of urgency. "We've tried to run, but every time we do, they find us. We don't know how they track us, but we need to keep moving. If we stay in one place too long, they'll come for us." The old man felt a surge of protectiveness rise within him. These children, alone and frightened, had no one else to turn to, and he couldn't bear the thought of them falling into the hands of those who sought to exploit them. "I won't let them take you," he said firmly, his weathered face hardening with resolve. We'll figure this out, together." For the first time since they had met, the children looked at him with a glimmer of hope. But in that moment, just as the old man stood up, determined to protect them at all costs, he heard something, a faint noise from outside, a soft, almost imperceptible sound, like the rustling of leaves. But he knew better. Someone was out there. The children froze, their eyes wide with panic. "They found us," the girl whispered. The old man's heart pounded in his chest. There was no time to waste. He motioned for the children to stay quiet and to follow him as he moved swiftly toward the back door. His mind raced, trying to think of a way to get them out of here before they were caught. But as they stepped into the alley, he could already hear the unmistakable sound of footsteps closing in. The old man's mind raced as he led the children into the shadows of the alley. The footsteps grew louder, echoing through the narrow street. They weren't alone anymore. The sound of pursuit was unmistakable. And the old man knew they didn't have much time. "Quick, this way," he whispered urgently, pulling them behind a row of abandoned crates, trying to shield them from view. His heart hammered in his chest as his eyes darted between the alley's exits. The children pressed against the wall, barely breathing. Suddenly, the sound of the footsteps stopped. The silence was deafening, stretching on for what seemed like an eternity. The old man strained his ears, trying to pick up any hint of where the danger was coming from. Then, without warning, a voice pierced the stillness. "I know you're there," a cold, measured voice called out. It wasn't loud, but it carried through the alley like a shiver down his spine. "You can't hide from us forever." The old man's grip tightened on the girl's hand, his knuckles white with tension. He had no idea who this voice belonged to, but he knew it wasn't good. It was the kind of voice that promised danger. The kind of voice that made you feel like you were being hunted. "They've found us," the girl whispered, her face pale with fear. The man's thoughts raced. He couldn't afford to be found. Not now, not when they were so close to freedom. But with each passing second, the danger grew. He glanced at the children, their faces wide with fear, and knew that there was no turning back. They had to move. "I have a plan," he said, his voice low but filled with determination. "We need to get to the rooftop. We'll have a better chance of escaping if we can see where they're coming from." Without waiting for a response, he motioned for the children to follow and started moving quickly down the alley. The old man had lived on the streets long enough to know how to navigate the maze of buildings. He led them to an old fire escape ladder, half rusted and creaking under their weight. But it was their only hope. The girl climbed first, her hands trembling as she pulled herself up. The boy followed close behind, his small hands gripping the ladder tightly. The old man brought up the rear, his legs stiff and aching. But he couldn't afford to slow down. Every second mattered. They reached the top, breathless and wide-eyed, just as a dark figure rounded the corner of the alley. The old man's heart sank as he recognized the silhouette. It was one of them. The pursuers. "They're getting closer," the girl whispered. "They won't stop until they have us." The old man's mind raced. He needed a way out. A way to keep them safe. But just as he was about to speak, a strange energy filled the air. The boy, who had been quiet all this time, stepped forward, his small hands held out in front of him. "I can stop them," he said, his voice trembling but steady. "I can use my powers. Just trust me." The old man looked down at the boy, his eyes filled with uncertainty and fear. He had no idea how the boy's powers worked, or if they were even strong enough to help them escape. But in that moment, with danger closing in, he had no other choice. "Do it," the old man said, his voice urgent. The boy closed his eyes and took a deep breath, his hands glowing faintly with a soft, otherworldly light. The air around them seemed to hum with energy, and the old man could feel the atmosphere shift. He held his breath, watching as the boy focused, his small face contorted with concentration. And then, suddenly, everything went silent. The wind stopped, the sounds of pursuit faded, and for a moment, it felt like the world had frozen. The old man blinked in disbelief. The boy's power, it was unlike anything he had ever seen. It wasn't just controlling objects or floating things, it was like he had paused time itself. But they didn't have long. The old man knew the boy's powers couldn't hold forever. "We need to move, now," he urged, pulling the children toward the next building. They hurried across the rooftop, the boy's power still holding the enemies at bay. But as they reached the next rooftop, The old man knew they weren't out of danger yet. They were running out of time. And they were running out of places to hide. They reached the next rooftop, panting heavily. But the boy's powers were beginning to flicker. The light in his hands dimmed. And the stillness in the air began to dissipate. The old man looked back at him. Concern etched on his face. "How much longer can you keep this up?" he asked. Urgency in his voice. The boy's small face was flushed with exertion. His breathing shallow. I don't know. It's hard to hold. But I can keep it for a little while longer." The girl turned to him. Her face full of worry. "We have to find somewhere safe. We can't keep running like this." The old man nodded. He had been through enough in his life to know when they were on the edge of a breaking point. But even though the danger was closing in, he refused to let it consume them. There had to be a way out. There always was. "Look," he said, pointing to a building in the distance. "There's an old church at the end of this block. It's abandoned, but it has a basement. If we can make it there, we can hide until we figure out what to do next." The children nodded, their faces a mixture of hope and fear. They had come to trust the old man. And the thought of a safe place, even for just a little while, was enough to give them the strength to keep moving. They sprinted across the rooftops, their hearts racing, and the boy's powers flickering in and out. Each time the stillness faded, the sounds of pursuit grew closer. They could hear the low murmur of voices, the clink of metal boots against the pavement, and the whispers of their pursuers' approach. As they neared the edge of the last rooftop, the old man's eyes darted to the street below. Shadows moved in the darkness. Figures that didn't belong. They were closing in, and fast. "Keep going," the old man barked, pushing the children ahead of him. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. They couldn't stop now. With a final leap, they cleared the last gap between the rooftops and landed on the edge of the church's roof. The old man felt his knees buckle as he landed, but he forced himself to stay upright. The children scrambled ahead, their fear evident but driven by the same need for safety. "Get to the window," the old man said, pointing to a narrow, cracked window on the second floor. "There's a door around the back. Get inside. I'll cover you." The girl nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "Come on," she urged, motioning for the boy to follow her. They made their way to the window. And as the old man watched them climb through, he heard the sound of footsteps on the rooftop behind him. He turned quickly, his heart racing. The figures were there, silhouetted against the moonlight. His hand reached into his coat pocket, grasping the small, rusty knife he kept there for protection. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. He stepped forward, ready to face whatever came next. But just as the first figure emerged into view, the boy's powers surged again. There was a bright flash of light, and the air seemed to vibrate with raw energy. The old man watched in awe as the figures froze in place, suspended in mid-motion. "They can't move," the girl's voice called from inside the church. "We can go." The old man didn't need to be told twice. He ran to the window, climbing in quickly after the children. As soon as he was inside, the boy's powers flickered one last time and faded, leaving the figures outside to resume their pursuit. But it was too late. They had made it inside. For now, they were safe. But the old man knew that their escape was only temporary. The danger wasn't over, and the pursuit would continue. The church, with its crumbling walls and abandoned pews, offered them a brief moment of respite. But it wasn't a permanent solution. They would have to move again soon. And with every passing hour, their enemies were growing closer. "What now?" the girl asked, her voice quiet in the dimly lit interior of the church. The old man looked around, his mind racing for answers. The church had been abandoned for years, its windows boarded up and its air thick with dust. But there was something about the place, something that felt right. Maybe it was the way the shadows seemed to hide them or the sense of peace that came from being away from the world's chaos. Even if only for a moment. "We wait," he said softly, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "We wait, and we make a plan." But deep down, he knew that they couldn't stay here forever. There was more at play than just a simple chase. The children's powers, the mysterious people who sought them, it was all connected. And the old man was starting to realize that their journey had only just begun. The old man sat on one of the dusty pews, his hands clasped together, his mind deep in thought. The children had gathered around him, their faces reflecting exhaustion but also a flicker of hope. The boy, still recovering from the strain of using his powers, sat quietly next to the girl. His small hands clenched tightly in his lap. The girl, despite her fear, looked up at the old man with a mixture of trust and uncertainty. "We can't stay here for long," the old man said, breaking the silence. "Sooner or later, they'll find us. They always do." The girl nodded solemnly. "We've been running for so long. I just wanted to end. I don't want anyone to get hurt." The boy looked up at the old man. His wide eyes filled with something more than fear. There was a strange sadness in them. A knowing that the pursuit was inevitable. "What if they catch us?" he whispered. The old man leaned down, his weathered face softening. "They won't catch us. Not if we're smart about it. We'll find a way to stop them. You've already shown me that you have great power, little one, and I know there's more to you than you realize." The boy didn't answer, but his eyes glowed faintly as if the words had sparked something deep within him. For a long moment, there was silence, broken only by the sound of the wind howling through the cracks in the church's walls. The old man's thoughts wandered back to his past, his own struggles, his battles, and the many times he'd felt lost. But this time, something was different. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about protecting something more precious than he could have ever imagined. He stood up, his legs aching from the years of hardship, but his resolve stronger than ever. "We need to go now. There's a way to stop them. There's a place where we can get answers. But we'll have to move fast." The children looked at him, confused and uncertain, but the girl stood up first. "Where are we going?" she asked. "There's an old man, a hermit." "Really? Who lives outside the city?" "He's lived there for years. Away from everything. He's the one who can help us. He's the one who knows what's going on with your powers." The boy's eyes widened. "He can help us?" The old man nodded. "He's the only one who can. But we have to leave now before they track us down again." Without another word, they all gathered their things, and the old man led them out of the church, carefully making their way through the dark streets, staying close to the shadows. They moved as silently as they could, avoiding the main roads, knowing that the pursuers were still searching for them. The journey to the hermit's home took hours. The night was cold, and the streets were eerily quiet. But the old man knew that every step brought them closer to safety. As they reached the edge of the city, the silhouette of a small cabin appeared in the distance. "This is it," the old man said, his voice filled with both relief and anticipation. "This is where we can get the answers we need." They approached the cabin cautiously. The boy's powers still weak, but his presence still a guiding light. The old man knocked softly on the door, and after a moment, it creaked open. An elderly man, with long white hair and a beard, appeared in the doorway. His eyes, though cloudy with age, were sharp, and he studied them carefully. "You've come," the hermit said, his voice raspy but knowing. "I've been expecting you." The children stepped forward, their faces filled with confusion. "How did you know we'd come?" the girl asked. The hermit smiled faintly. "I've seen the signs. I know who you are. And I know what they want from you. But the time has come for you to understand your true purpose." The old man stepped forward, his expression serious. "We need your help. They're after these children. They have powers, and we don't know how to stop them from being used." The hermit's gaze shifted to the boy, and for a moment, the room seemed to grow still. "The powers are not something to fear," he said softly. "They are a gift, but they can only be controlled when the one who holds them understands their true source." The boy looked up at him, his face filled with confusion. "What do you mean?" The hermit nodded slowly, his gaze kind. "The power you possess comes from an ancient source, something that has been passed down through generations. You are the key to stopping what's coming. But you must first understand the balance between light and dark." The old man looked at the hermit, his heart heavy with the weight of what was to come. The children were no longer just running from danger, they were at the center of something much larger. A battle that spanned time itself. "The choice will soon be yours," the hermit continued, his voice growing more intense. "You can embrace your powers, use them to protect the world, or let them fall into the wrong hands, where they will be used to destroy everything." The boy nodded slowly, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "I understand," he whispered. The hermit's eyes softened. "Then it is time to face your destiny." And with those words, the old man knew that the journey had come full circle. It had started with fear and uncertainty, but now there was a glimmer of hope. The children were ready to face their future, and with the old man by their side, they would fight for what was right. As they left the cabin, The night air felt different. It felt like the beginning of something new. Something that would change the world forever. And so, their journey continued, filled with both uncertainty and hope, as they prepared to face the forces that sought to use the children's powers for destruction. What came next would determine not just their fate, but the fate of the world itself.